Welcome to Amaka Intellectual Factory, where I host podcasts and many other interesting stuff. Believe it or not, I am not quite done with breaking down Secretary Rubio's and Stephen Miller's calling out the reality of far-left terrorism or left-wing terrorism, its threat to America and the whole world. If you have not already, check out my videos titled Secretary Marco Rubio Calls Out Far-Left Terrorism, tapping into his inner Saint Michael the Archangel, and Stephen Miller, I agree with you, but we are not far from a place of no return. Those are introductory videos to the next series of videos and articles that I will be posting and writing respectively about this thing, this monster of many names that Secretary Rubio himself acknowledged and exposed their penchant to change their names. They can change their names every single day for the next 100 years. The fact will always be that the apple does not fall far from the tree, and by their fruits ye shall know them. You will never be deceived by them as long as you heed the advice of Sun Tzu, an ancient Chinese military strategist, who said, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and in every battle you will be victorious." To put it more precisely, you must know and understand their strategies, tactics, and logistics. Just like Master Sun advised in his war treatise, The Art of War, we must always be calculating because more calculations lead to more victory and less calculations lead to less victory. How much more when we make no calculations at all? The focus on Cuba's communist agenda started with the United States State Department releasing a 100-page document titled Cuba, the Capital of 21st Century Communism. I have a PDF copy of the document, but I have not read it yet, that I must admit. However, according to Lara Trump's summary of the document, it states that, and I quote, Cuba's goal is to essentially erase the United States from the earth. It also details Cuba's spy network that's been undermining American interest. End of quote.
Secretary, great to have you back. Thank you so much.
Glad to be back. It's been a while.
There's so much to talk about, but I want to start with Cuba. This has been of particular interest to the State Department right now. You guys released a 100-page report on Cuba, calling it the capital of 21st century communism. And this report talks about the fact that Cuba's goal essentially is to erase the United States from the earth. It also details a Cuban spy network that's been undermining American interests.
Secretary Rubio, in response to one of Lara Trump's questions, called Cuba an espionage superpower, further stating that those who have followed the issue of Cuba are familiar with the catastrophic threats that they pose to the United States and the whole world. Of course, I am paraphrasing the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. By now, my reader or viewer would observe that I always include their threats to the whole world every time I mention their threats to the United States. This is for the benefit of those who do not understand how globalists work. Just because America is currently the only country overtly addressing this threat does not mean they do not pose a threat to the whole world.
How did we get to a place where Cuba has become so much of a threat, it feels like, again, to the United States?
I think for those who have followed the issue of Cuba, or this is not unfamiliar to us, but to the average American, you see Cuba, small country, 90 miles off our shores, 9.5 million people population. What people forget that when it comes to things like espionage and influence operations, they actually are an influence and espionage superpower. If you look at the history of espionage in the United States, Cuba is the only country that consistently has implanted and embedded spies in our system without even paying them. We had an ambassador, a U.S. ambassador, who ended up being a Cuban spy and was recently convicted. We've had them penetrate the highest levels of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Ana Belén Montes was one of the single biggest intelligence failures on the part of the United States and one of the biggest penetrations we've ever had in our system. So, and then on the influence front, if you look all throughout Latin America, every communist left-wing insurgency that's destabilized governments across the region, every single one of them over the last 40, 50 years has found its support, its help, in many cases its birth from a Cuban influence operation. So it was an important report just to highlight the role they play in our country, a very negative role.
The report also links Cuban influence to the rise of Antifa, the riots that we saw in 2020, as well as the surge of radical activism that we've seen all over these college campuses. To the average person, those things, I think, feel generally organic, but it turns out there are a lot of different powers, Cuba being one of them, that are influencing all of these things day to day.
Absolutely. It's the same network of protesters around the country. They were the same people you saw on the streets burning things in 2020. They then flip it around and they become the pro-Hamas protesters, and they flip it around, and within 48 hours of Maduro's arrest have pre-printed signs outside the courthouse demanding his release. And then they're out there doing the ICE stuff, attacking ICE agents. There's nothing organic about it. It is funded, it is organized, and Cuba is a part of that network, and in some cases, a critical part of that network, and it's a network they will weaponize against us. And they talk about it openly, about how they will use that network to pressure American policymakers, not just here in the United States like Code Pink, but all over the world.
I like the fact that Secretary Rubio pointed out the insignificance of the smallness of their geographical location in relation to the threats they pose with their communist agenda. In an interview a Code Pink representative had with Democracy Now!, the smallness of the Cuban country was used to counter the U.S. State Department's official document on Cuba's communist threats in the 21st century. It should also be noted that Code Pink organization is currently under investigation by the U.S. government. True to the title of this article and video, Secretary Rubio said, and I quote, "I think the world is also going through a period of rapid transformation. There is clearly a geographical ordering that is occurring, and I have talked about this repeatedly. After the Cold War, everybody thought the whole world was gonna be free enterprise democracies, and everyone will get along and nation states will no longer matter. And unfortunately, we made decisions in our foreign policy on that ridiculous basis that actually caused us to hurt our country." End of quote. Wow. I concur. What a breath of fresh air. Now, Bush Jr. and Obama did not make things any easier for us. While the former derailed the United States foreign policy, the latter almost sent the United States straight to hell. And I will leave it at that for now.
What would you say, though, about the stability of the world right now, given you're in your position, the president is who he is?
I think the world has always been complicated and tricky. I think the difference now is if something happens halfway around the world in a place you've never heard about before, and it's really dramatic, you're going to hear about it almost instantaneously. I think the world is also going through a period of rapid transformation. I mean, there is clearly a geopolitical reordering that is occurring, and I've talked about this repeatedly. We are, after the end of the Cold War, everybody thought the whole world was just going to become free enterprise democracies and everyone would get along and nation states would no longer matter. And unfortunately, we made decisions in our foreign policy on that ridiculous basis that actually caused us to hurt our country.
The U.S. refocusing its foreign policy by making the Cuban threat and its front role in the spread of communism priority absolutely puts America back on track. This is a threat America has been trying to stop since the presidency of William McKinley in 1897, where they identified themselves as anarchists. But Secretary Rubio mentioned it is still the same people with the same agenda. However, since the time of McKinley, one thing has led to another, and then the United States refocuses its foreign policy on something else. And usually, it is something that manifested from the United States not aggressively addressing this lingering communist threats. It was an issue for John F. Kennedy. It was also an issue for Ronald Reagan. There is no going around or managing this threat. Communism is the big elephant in the room that must be addressed because the world it envisions for us is not a world any person that values their individual civil liberties, free will, and the beautiful things of the world that Mother Nature has so bountifully graced us with will subscribe to. We have seen too many examples of societal degradation that have taken place as a result of letting this ideology to spread and grow, to let ourselves fall into that trap again. Mind you, Marco Rubio is the son of Cuban immigrants. It takes a man with the fear of God in him to be this truthful about his parents' place of origin, because he is 100% a brave American patriot with whom all American patriots are all pleased with. If you really want to know the extent of the damage this infiltrating communist ideology has done to America and the whole world, dare to speak the truth about it and its little baby ideologies, and watch how quickly you are attacked. Addressing communism solves the problem of Islamic extremism. It solves the problem of venostrophobia, misogyny, and femicide. It also solves all the trafficking of human and substance problem. Now, I am speaking not just from my studies of historical events, but the occult as well. All these vices are linked. Communism is the rise of the beast system. It is funny how the book of Revelations in chapter 13 is very clear about the identity of the beast, which is unequivocally described as a leopard. Yet I have seen videos on social media where people are trying to identify this beast but are unable to do so. In order for this beast system to fully take form, it has to hijack America. Please note that this is my interpretation based on what I know. And of course, it is open to discussion for mature minds interested in rubbing minds with me. It is interesting how the beast in the book of Revelations is described as a leopard, because there are a group of men who have historically been described as leopard men. What is the connection to Cuba, you may ask? Well, here is your answer. As the late 1990s was ending and the world was approaching the early 2000s, there were many things that happened, good and bad, that marked this transition. But not every significant event got global or even regional recognition. Part of this quiet, significant event was the reunion of leopard men globally. For the first time since transatlantic slave trade, perhaps, or even since the last civilization, the leopard men in Africa reunited with the leopard men in the Americas. And their headquarters in the Americas is Cuba. That is, the headquarters of the leopard men in the Americas is Cuba. In the United States, their headquarters is New Orleans. Yes, Haitians are typically associated with New Orleans. However, Leopard men also played a significant role in the history of New Orleans. At the height of Leopard men's global dominion, they stationed themselves all over the African continent. However, their main locations on the African continent include Congo, Sierra Leone, and Angola, just to mention a few. And when you look into the history of these African countries, you will see a significant presence of Cuban influence, especially in the 1950s and 1960s during the Cold War era. If I am to take it a little bit further, it is my submission that these Leopard men were the original ancient druids of ancient Ireland. But in order not to digress more than this, further discussions on Leopard men, be them the ones from Congo and Sierra Leone or the ones from Cuba, will be a topic for another day. With that, I would like to end this article and video by reaffirming the topic of this article and video of this article. Marco Rubio putting the spotlight on Cuba and its threats to America most definitely puts America back on track with regards to America's foreign policy. The end of my article. As always, you are more than welcome to start a conversation, to join this conversation, and I will be super duper excited to join in. Well, that's all I have to say for now. Until next time, take care of your lovely selves. And remember, life is beautiful and worth living.